Hello, here I am in the flesh. Apologies, everybody. I was that well prepared. I was already logged in, and so I had to log back out to log back in to let me do the live. So started clicking lots of buttons. So apologies, everybody. But yeah, good to be on board.
Yeah, I think I might need to edit out that first part because it's me sort of just trying to fill space with my long droning voice and a few phone calls going off in the background. But we're very glad to have you on, Ben.
Thank you. Really, really great to be on, Chris. And it's always a pleasure doing bits and pieces with you. And also, yeah, hopefully being involved and engaged with the rest of the audience and people who are interested in, what their next investment is, what their next opportunity might be, and always looking for angles to try and, bring back that sort of next property investment, HMO, whatever it might be, into their sort of portfolio. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And what's your week been like, Ben? Has it been flat out? Are you slowing down for Christmas?
Speeding up for Christmas, speeding up. I've got to buy the kids presents. So if I don't keep working, then they're not going to have very much for Christmas. So it's just really interesting. We work with all sorts of different characters, different people, different services, listening and chatting to them. I actually was at a social affordable housing function yesterday. It was inside a media who do these occasional sort of like networking sort of lunch networking type do's, and just really the huge demand that we all still know about in terms of housing, and when you look at it from that perspective and someone says, well, there's a huge need, and even more so on the affordable side, but I think just generically across the UK, there's a huge need for housing. It's why it's the government political potato. It's why they're trying to release and talk about their 1.5 million homes, all of those things that they're trying to do and trying to create. So it creates what is, still a healthy market, although it might be difficult. I think they all understand it's difficult. The actual pathway is worth doing. It's worth pushing because the demand is there. I think government as well is really seeing this affordable housing side of things as well as a real push. And although there's a few barriers to entry for some of the SMEs getting into that side of things, for the big companies already involved, they say, there is lots and lots of opportunity, and they're really passionate about seeing more housing being delivered. You can't just do all affordable. You have to have private, so there has to be a mix. So really, they do tend to piggyback off each other. They're a net result of each other. And again, I think that was quite positive, sort of hearing that, and just a general sort of sentiment. I think usually the sentiment I get is, costs are going up, things are getting more difficult, planning's become harder, all of those things. But I think they're open and say, well, yeah, but also the demand is still very much there, and that's what makes a good business to be in. Whatever wobbles you might have along the way. And it's a long-term process. It's not short-term. That's one thing that also came really. So, really positive. Yes, really busy. It's just having to think of inventive ways and actually be patient, which is really hard. I'm not a patient person, but actually being patient with deals, patient with landowners, patient with our clients, and actually giving them time, because then that trust, and it is this big word of trust, is it builds through. So I think we're doing that. We have a bit of ups and downs, but actually with that, really, really keen to see how positive people are in terms of drive through this housing. So yeah, all been good.
Amazing. And this might be sort of a new term for people in terms of empty homes. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory what it is, but just for the avoidance of doubt, Ben, what defines an empty home?
Yeah, so empty home it is usually something that's been unoccupied or empty for over sort of over 12 months. But actually, I think it comes more down to, why is it empty in the first place? I think people say, well, okay, great, it's empty, but, why? There can be a number of reasons, really. So the fact that something is empty can be done with sort of things like inheritance and probate delays. Get quite a few problems with that, where people haven't really made a will, so they don't know where things are going. Could be sort of a single person that don't actually ever needed a will, so it's ended up in that scenario. So people don't know what's going to happen with it. Obviously, probate is a fairly obvious one, and actually there's lots of backlog in terms of probate and dealing with that. It's a very heavy paperwork sort of exercise, so it actually takes longer to actually just identify the next stage of that property's life after that person sort of dies, and especially if it hasn't been cleared before. Can relate to somebody, and this is probably a precursor to it, is that someone who might be in care, might have been ill, or been admitted to hospital, or however that might be, mentally or physically, and that can have a huge amount of issues with that. And that person is then, say, in the hospital. I think there's an emotional attachment, strangely. Some people will just, although they've got something, they don't want to let something go. They've just, whether it's an inherited property or some sort of sentimental reasons. And it's strange how people have such a huge tie to almost not wanting to let something go. It's almost closing a chapter in their lives, and then it becomes empty, and then it stays empty, and then it gets worse and worse. You then also have people who just don't have physical capital to bring that property back into things. So they've inherited a property, they've got a property, and it always feels just too complicated for them to do anything. They don't have the money to actually, think about, we're going to pay for some pre-agency fees and some of the studies and work you have to do even before you put a property on the market. They might even think, well, actually, you know what? I know it's a legal requirement to have an EPC, but I just don't even have the money, and they get themselves a little bit, it can be something like a bit of an over worried state, and so it's a leaving till tomorrow sort of type problem. So, yeah, an empty property, and from an empty dwelling point of view, it is something that's over 12 months. It's been sort of, in continuation, has been left empty for that length of time, and then it's classed as empty. People will sort of try to identify, why and how, why that, and where that sort of happened from. And then people are sort of looking into maybe things like council tax register, things like that as well, trying to understand, as someone applying for council tax relief, but also is it one of these other issues that I've just sort of mentioned that's actually leading to why that property is empty?
Okay, awesome. So with these clinics, what we want to do is we want to make them as interactive as possible and actually provide a resource for people to come forward and ask their questions and ask scenarios based on stuff that they've experienced within their local communities. And certainly if there are empty homes, then they're able to reach out to Ben and find out a little bit more about how best to do that. So I've had some direct messages and a couple of emails from people that have written in with some really interesting questions, Ben. So if it's all right with you, I want to put some questions. And of course, if our audience would like to ask you anything, then please do put it in the chat. That would be amazing. And we can answer them live on the live stream today. So, Ben, we've got a question. We've spotted a 1930s terrace that's been boarded up for years. Council tax shows long-term vacancy. What's the cleanest step-by-step to identify the owner and open a constructive conversation without spooking them?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty common, but actually trying to just establish this step-by-step process of understanding who the owner is. I am always a huge fan of this, is actually really just speaking to a neighbour. So you might visit the site now. If you're there and you've clearly identified it, the quickest, easiest way would just be go and door knock a neighbour. Now the neighbour is more than likely to give a bit of information. They probably are pretty frustrated that empty property is empty, because it affects them either from a heating perspective or antisocial behaviour, and also just some natural sort of worries that happen with properties that are empty and how that can impact their own property value. So I'm always a huge fan of just really trying to just do a bit of a door knock, and it can be quite soft touch. You're just an interested person, you're trying to understand what's going on, and really go through that style of process. Now, clearly, if they don't know, because that's the thing, you've just identified and seen it, then you start to think about, okay, well, what are the legal channels? What is the legal identification of that property and land? And within land registry, and also a number of the geospatial portals, you can start to look and identify exactly where that property is, and also its legal entity of what's gone on with it, who previously owned it. Now, you'd hopefully, in that position, if it feels like it's been sort of recently boarded up, there is some activity around it. That's the point, because it's been secured. And because it's been secured, there's sometimes, well, actually, when you're there, there might even be a sort of notice of who secured it. But if not, then it's going to this legal identity of finding out who it is. And that more than likely is probably an individual. You'd like to think it isn't the local authority, but obviously a number of properties can be owned by organisations such as the local authority. So, but if it's a legal owner, then you start to think, well, okay, do they have some sort of forwarding address? So is the address actually match the address of the property itself? If it doesn't, then you now know you've got somewhere where you can write to. And that probably is the best way to introduce it. Introduce yourself, but introduce yourself from a point of view of not, well, I want your property. It's really just introducing yourself so that person's received something on their doormat. They've had a quick read of it, and they're thinking, okay, well, that's interesting. This person isn't trying to say I'll buy or let. They've just noticed that this property's empty. They would love to just have sort of a conversation. Now, whether or not you receive a reply from that letter, I work on the approach of actually you sort of keep repeating that, but not harassing that. And so sending, forth and almost saying, look, we haven't heard. Here are our telephone details. There are also, if you then know there is a forwarding address, then that forwarding address might have there might be a landline attached to that, so through the 192.com or similar in terms of the telephone number registries and putting a call in. I would not be putting a call in until perhaps the letter's there, because they don't know who you are. It feels very cold. At least if they've got a piece of paper, it feels less intrusive. And then they might have recognised that when you do call, then your company and your name is being consistent with that information that's been sort of sent through. So, yeah, that from me is where it is. I mean, there's the difficulties when you don't realise there's anything on the legals, or it's just not really divulging onto it, and then you're having to start to think about other perhaps experts, or even through yourself. So there are things like genealogy experts out there, people who can trace back land ownership, and they can trace back sort of identifying people through a process of going and looking at public records, deaths, looking at other sort of parts of public records, which then give a hint or location to who that owner is. So, we have a number of empty sort of properties sort of sent in, and it's often, Chris, exactly that sort of question that you're asking. And we always do say to people, getting boots on ground is so important. Sitting behind your desk is not going to get a job done.
Brilliant. That's a really comprehensive answer there, Ben. So I hope that's helped a lot of people. Now, I've just seen Donna's joined the live stream, and Donna is fiercely interested in probate properties. I've had a few conversations with her regarding probates and bungalows that she's been looking at. So there's another question that's been sent in, which might be interesting to Donna. On our street, a probate property has grass waist high, and it's also got mail piling up. As neighbours, what evidence should we collect before approaching the empty homes officer to trigger action?
Yeah, another good question. So this is where you're almost stepping slightly away. So you're not looking from your own personal perspective, but you're looking at actually as a local community perspective. I mean, something I'm deeply passionate about, hence why we have our Land Hero app to get people to send in empty and derelict properties all across the UK, just so we got what is a true reflection of a live map of empty properties all across the UK. Because the first is identifying and making sure that someone is aware that is empty and so on. So, yeah, for us, we work with local authorities, we send them information, but we would very much say, look, contact the local authority. In terms of evidence, photos are as good as anything. They really are, really give the sort of real perspective of where that is, and they've timestamped to exactly where they are. Now, local authorities are under pressure. We know they're difficult. We know they don't have a huge deal of funding. They should have an empty dwelling sort of officer, so to have an empty housing officer. Now, so that's the person you want to be speaking to. Now, that empty sort of housing officer they have the ability, and there are powers that local authority have to actually temporarily take over that property, and also even potentially long-term manage it to bring it back to a state where it can self-generate some income, and thereby gets to a point where there would be an interested sort of sale party, or there's something that would be it's easier for that actual existing owner to let go. Now, these are called empty dwelling management orders. Bit of a mouthful, a bit convoluted. They feel a bit like, for the person who's got the property, feels like a bit aggressive, perhaps, maybe, because actually the local authority can step in and actually come in and go, okay, we're going to temporarily take it over for 12 months to get it back into some sort of management order, at least bring it back into some sort of state where it could be rented out, or it could be sold. They also have a long-term version. So they've got, well, that's called the interim one, but they have also a final final MDO as well, which actually means that they can take it over for up to 7 years. And in that, they can go in, use this order to take occupation of that property and fit it out so that it can be then rented out. So these powers are there. It's just local authorities need the willing and the weight of people saying, look, you've got the business, please get involved. And by getting involved, that can often be kind of the oil that kind of lubricates that sort of situation of that individual, whether it's sensitive or not. It's probate and maybe there's a lot of distress in the family, but then it brings in the support for that family for perhaps dealing with some of that. And it just opens up those conversations and knowing that actually there's an opportunity to maybe have a bit of an interim and then a final. So there's an easier, softer step through. So we would say absolutely identify it. So we work really closely with them, and then they can start to work their powers. Now, local authorities work really closely with the Action for Empty Homes, the Empty Homes Network. The Empty Homes Network is actually a service for local authorities and training them and helping them understand this. A chap called Adam Cliff, absolutely brilliant, really, really brilliant. He holds a conference each year, and he gets all these people in the room to help the local authorities and give them the incentive to kind of be involved and actually, hit Government General, bring these houses back in. So, and alongside them, there's a whole load of other people, but who are the genealogists, lawyers, and other sort of agency type specialist people who are sort of in with the local authorities to try and help them resolve, much like ourselves, really.
So, Ben, we're going to talk a lot about empty homes officers in these clinics, and we've spoken a lot about empty homes officers on our previous webinars. What is an empty homes officer? Why are they so important within this kind of strategy, if you like? And I guess phoning them up and telling them that they're not doing anything about a property on your street is probably not the best course of action. You want to obviously build a relationship with the empty homes officer so that they actually feel like they can give you a call or you can work in partnership with them. What are some of the best ways to approach an empty homes officer and what can be achieved with them?
Yeah, a really fair point question. This trust element, again, as loads of people are talking about it, and it is important. If you're going down the route of thinking there could be actually an opportunity for yourselves to secure the property and actually be part of that conversations, the empty homes officer, they need support. They don't have enough time. I think it's perhaps there was only about 70%, 80% actually have a dedicated empty homes officer in the UK. So it was a scenario where there was some that were people were just doing it by default, staring at a spreadsheet, looking at these properties coming in or being identified, and then having or struggling to have the resource to actually deal with them. So just by the fact that you're getting this property and checking whether or not it is already being notified and it's actually on that spreadsheet, it's on their list, has been identified. And it's why we're creating a central database. That's the whole point of Landlords, creating a central database for all empty property, not just homes, all empty and commercial properties as well, so that then people have got a point of reference to know. And then the date stamp of the when and how long it's been empty for is also really key, because they have a big list, and the ones that they're going to deal with are the ones that have been empty for the longest. So by being involved, being helpful, saying, is there things that we could do to help, clearly identified it. It's been broken into, do you have a security person? That all helps the local authority, because the local authority don't need further complaints. They don't need to fly tipping issues, because with that causes them more cash problems and issues, things that the local authority's got to deal with. They don't need complaints, because that's going to cost them time and money as well. So the more you can start to help them with just perhaps even some of those simple issues brings you on side. Now, the local authority aren't going to suddenly say, oh, great, we're going to sell that property to you, but they could be the conduit for you having that conversation with that empty property owner. They're doing some of the legwork, so it's not over costing you in terms of doing that, and then trying to work, with people to try and then make sure we're making contact with that person and say, okay, what's the process here? Are you worried, and what parts are you that are causing the stress and the strain with this all? Because clearly, if you've got a property and now you've got fly tipping, you can't just go and take it down your local tip, because you don't know what's in it. What has been dumped on your land. And then that is a higher cost because you've actually got then to have a dedicated person who's got a waste removal permit to then be able to dispose of that waste when you know it's been disposed of properly. Because has someone dumped some asbestos boarding on there? Is there some other contaminant material that you just do not know about? And you cannot know it in fly tipping. You just will not know. Because the whole point it's been there is because someone was, I was about to say too, be careful what I say, but they fly tipped because it was cheaper to do that, and they've dumped stuff that would have actually cost them money to take somewhere else. So yeah, there's plenty of words I would use for them, but I'm probably not going to do it on this live stream.
Well, there's a brilliant video that goes around on social media of a group of contractors that have got access to a digger, and they basically find a street address and name address for the people that have fly tipped from a letter that they've discarded. They basically scoop it all up and then dump it straight on their drive. I've watched that video probably about 10 times, and it's never more satisfying than watching that back.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. So. This empty housing officer, they are, an individual who works in that local authority dealing with an unenviable list of things that don't move fast, and they can't just quickly just mobilise someone just tidying up the garden without contacting the sort of the owners and things. So the support network for them to find out who the owner is so that they then can start actively engaging them is really important. So they want to know. So if people have a bit of information that you may have picked up from a neighbour about that person, well, that's going to be really helpful to the empty homes officer, and actually likes to pull it up their list. They've got a big pile of paper. If it's one that's of interest to you, you want to help them get it up higher up that list and find an easier pathway. Now, you'd probably ask them, why would I help them? And it's like, well, the answer for them is like, why are you helping me? But if there is an end result to actually bring that property back into occupation, everyone's same goal is all aligned. So, yes, there's going to be ones you're going to win or lose. The local authority aren't looking to own it. They're looking to bring it back into occupation. And so that's why they've got this interim and final. The interim, there are other ways. Well, they've got this. There's also, Kent have done a brilliant thing called No Use Empty, where they're offering things like interest-free loans and things for bringing properties back into repair. Because then you know that by having an interest-free loan, we'll put a bit of capital in, and then that person who owns a property thinks, well, great, now if I sell it, I haven't incurred extra cost. I've just got the clean cost of that interest-free loan. I've now got that property up to a state that is sellable or occupationable. Is occupationable a word? I think it is, but I think if it's not, I'm bringing it in 100%. But can be occupied. So really good dialogue. It isn't a quick fix. You bring in these people, and they have not got a property that are going to suddenly alert you to think, oh great, I'll hand you my big list of empty properties that you can go off and go and chase all these people. That's not what you're after. What you're after is you're bringing one to them, and you're talking to them and seeing if it's on their list, and then saying how you can help to build up that relationship. And then that might be the conduit for you being involved. And they're dealing with this day in, day out.
Well, Don has actually put a question in the chat. There's a property I keep writing to, hadn't got a full title. I believe they're looking for a beneficiary. The lady cannot sell next door. It's now a dumping ground. Anything else I can do? It's in the hands of Essex County Council.
Oof. Yeah, okay. So being in contact with Essex Council to find out what they have actually done. You said the difficulty, and Donna, you're quite right, writing the property owner, you're getting absolutely nothing back. So then really trying to find other family members. Is there any linkage to that surname, that person, that then you could contact? Brother, sister, family, son, father, whatever it might be, mother. There will be someone who's connected at some point to that individual. And it's trying to really wrap up that sort of that spy network of what it is. Now, Essex, again, depending on what their list looks like and, how recent it's been identified to them, it either could have been on there for a long time and they're having their own problems. But encouraging, so things from these will hunters, people like this, and also these genealogists, they make money out of this process. A will hunter, for example, we've seen them on the sort of TV. They're making what would be a percentage off the back of potentially the sale of that property. So for them, it's absolutely crucial that they get under the skin of that landowner who owns that property and makes contact with them, or a family member. And it might be a family member that doesn't even know that they now own it, if it's now stuck in sort of probate and there wasn't a will done. It's what part of that process do we know where that and where it is stuck, and who is it going to? And if people don't know, then the will hunters are desperately searching and seeking down these people because they make fees out of it. They make money. They're not interested in the actual what ends up happening with the property. They're just interested in what will be the proceeds and the balance of where their fee comes from. So working with them and actually just saying, finding out one of these local genealogists or one of these will hunters to say, are you involved? Do you know of this property? And they will, of course, be contacting the local authority as well, but also trying to get into the skin of exactly who it is, and then staying close to them, because they don't get paid until that property gets sold or the proceeds of the will are materialised from it.
Well, interestingly enough, Donna's just put a follow-up question. Is it worth me contacting Finders International? They have put a notice on the door.
Finders are great. You know what? They're one I've seen very regularly at the Empty Homes Network conference. They know exactly what they're sort of doing. They are, and that is their specialism. There's no point trying to suddenly become a Finders International unless that's what your job change is thinking about doing. Getting someone else to do and work for it, knowing that from the back of it, you're going to get, perhaps an opportunity, or you might be part of that conversation, which maybe realises an opportunity for you. So yeah, it's really keen. I mean, bearing in mind we've just talked about Kent, and in Essex, it's actually they're really quite at the forefront. They are really forward thinking about what they're doing down there, and this sort of filters out knowing that these people are quite keen to it. So getting in that conversation, but as I said, taking a proactive step with a Finders is a really brilliant way to move forward on it.
Yeah, we've worked quite a few times with Finders International, both myself and Ben. We've got a contact there called Mohammed Udin. It might be worth saying that you've had this live stream today with Chris and Ben, and that you're after a bit of advice and the right contact within Finders International to actually get that conversation started. It's not a conventional route in terms of actually just phoning them up and trying to speak to them, but at least you've got a direct contact there that you can speak to, and they will be able to connect you with the right person that's actually dealing with that case. So yeah, I'd definitely give that a try.
Yeah, and Mohammed's brilliant, isn't he? We all had a bit of a webinar and a chat with him as well, but also I've spoken to him quite a number of times, and when I've been at the conference stuff, so it's great. Really, good point of contact. Yeah, totally agree, Chris.
Great. Well, there's a question that follows up from this from one of our emails in this morning. If a property is an eyesore but the owner is uncooperative, when do you recommend pushing for an EDMO versus a CPO, which is a compulsory purchase order? And what's the realistic timeline and cost profile from your experience?
Yeah, fine. So, I mean, firstly, that in terms of compulsory purchase and the EDMO, they are only powers that the local authority have. So they are outside of any sort of private sort of dealings. Now, there is a funny exception to that on CPOs, but there's huge thresholds, and this talks about regeneration. So both of those options are there. They always come secondary to trying to contact the owner, speak to them, find a thought process in terms of interest-free loans, trying to actually work with the owner, and also work with all these consultants around them to try and alleviate the strain and the process of moving to it. The empty dwellings management order is the first step, really, because what you're doing is you're bringing something back into occupation without actually taking that property physically off someone's hands, which can be very distressing. So it is really important that through the EDMO process is that what you're doing is you're creating a property which is a bit more wind and watertight. It then means that it's actually potentially mortgageable for someone to do it. So it opens up a much bigger market of people that can actually look at that and be involved in it. And then, of course, there's a stepping stone from that, from the interim into the final. The CPO is, local authorities still see it as quite an extreme step of actually compulsory purchasing someone's property, someone's land. It's a compulsory purchase order. It is quite cost heavy for the local authority. They're getting better at it, and I think, I don't know if I've got local authorities on now, but it is, the more you do, no, unsurprisingly, the easier it becomes. But because they haven't done so many and not at this level, it's quite hard. And the CPO has got to have really very, very clear intent of exactly what it is and why it makes a difference to actually take that property from somebody. So you'd almost have had to gone through the other processes first before you could even get that process. And it's the damage that the CP, that property is doing to others that would then form the basis of actually this is causing real serious detriment and harm to that local community. So therefore, that's why the CPO could step in. The EDMO is, as I said, is very much an interim one, and we're talking sort of timeframes and costs. The problem is that a property might not be actually identified to the local authority until 12 months. It will then perhaps be 6-12 months of actually trying to talk, trying to speak to that person, maybe even trying to go through a bit of a negotiated kind of type process to get to a feeling of either that no contact being made, no active progress is being made. So therefore, the end result is that we've given this person after 6 months, hey, you know what? If it's another 6 months, the EDMO is going to come your way. And what you then talk to them is the post. So we've had 12-month vacant. We're now in our 6 months of trying to speak to this individual with no avail, but we do have an idea who it is. There is a point of contact, but they're just being very reluctant to actually engage, or mentally unsound, or hospital. There could be some ways of doing it. So the second 6 months is you're now telling them what's now going to happen. Now, this is letters, this is time. And the local authority at this point, it's not becoming actually particularly expensive. It's a process drive, so it takes away some of the time from dealing with other things. Once you've actually the EDMO set, then it's the amount of work you have to do to bring it back into some sort of order, whether that's actually making, new kitchen, what works if you actually got to physically do the property and the roofing and things like that to actually make it, firstly wind and watertight for occupation. So then that range can be quite significant. If it becomes to a point where the local authority think, well, actually, I'm having to spend sort of 30, £40,000, and this is just any capital sort of type sum, then it's really hard on their investment return. They're bringing back some good, but actually, where's their money coming back? Hence why the final might step in. So if there's more work that needs to be done, what they need to know is they can actually have the property for longer. So then they're looking at going, well, okay, if we're spending, £30,000, we know we've got to work out how we get our money back. So we're going to have at least for 7 years, knowing that we're going to get, a few thousand a year that's going to be able to pay off that money that we've spent on it. Because otherwise, they can't just throw money at something and not actually have the occupation and actually have their recovery of that money back. Of course, councils will give money for good reason, and actually there's grants and there's other things to do, but that's the point. That's not the way that they've got to do things. They've got to get the money back. So in answering, that timeline hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour to where it sort of goes. But then this capital sum also introduces why you would choose different things and different measures of why you would do them, and knowing you're going to get money back. Now, if it's just a case of it's been empty, but it's watertight, it might just need a lick of paint, well, that's fine. Taking for a year, just getting somebody in there, tidying up the outside landscaping, do a little bit of one side, kitchen's okay, it's manageable. Maybe you've only spent maybe a thousand, a couple of thousand. Well, you know you're going to get that money back in terms of rental for putting an individual or somebody in there for that sort of temporary period. But again, that's what you got to sort of, it's got to be, that's how it's looked at.
Well, we've got two questions here, Ben, and I'm gonna combine them because they feed quite nicely into each other. So I'm thinking of creating an empty homes proposal pack. It would look like photos, scope, budget, social value, timelines. What would you recommend would be worth showing the empty homes officer in terms of what you can provide for a property? And then there's another question here, which is a long-term empty HMO with a revoked license. Would you bring it back as family units, supported housing, or HMO again? And how do you use the local housing need data to justify the choice to the local councils?
Fine. So it's interesting in terms of sort of the HMO example of why that's been. I presume it's not hit some regulations. It's missing some regulations and why that's been perhaps closed down or stopped, or effectively that's ended up in a scenario where something has not quite adjoin, no planning, or however it might be. So straight away, you got to think of actually just understanding the exact reasons of why it's ended up in the state that it has, and then really thinking about what that proposal mix is for you in terms of taking forward. So what's the rectification? Is the case of getting the local authority on board to say this still can be an HMO? In terms of sort of the building regs, things were missed, but actually these can be rectified, and as a result, this is going to provide some local housing need. So let's work together in terms of actually trying to rectify whatever the objection or why it's ended up in the state. You're looking at different proposals. Clearly, if there is a huge reluctance in terms of that, and that's why, from a planning perspective, it is never going to be HMO. And there's the terms of what the local authorities process now. You can clearly appeal, but then that's going to cost you a lot of money. So, and there's still a risk at the end that that's still not going to be accepted. So yes, you're then looking at either, well, are we looking at multi-occupational type families? Are we looking at other sort of commercial sort of reasons for bringing that back into and things? Again, all of these have planning and also building regularity compliance. So how much is it going to cost you to get it from one place to the other? And also, what is the planning restrictions behind those? So getting the local authority very quickly on board with that is really, really important. Speaking to a local planning officer, speaking to any of their compliance, their building compliance and housing officers, depending on who and where the objections come from, is absolutely key. And key before you're actually putting any pen to paper. You might have made an offer, so I don't know what scenario is. You could easily put this property under offer, and while it's under offer, that would give you what happens some time. Maybe it's a fairly short window if you've got the property under offer, but it will give you a short window where you feel that you can go off and have those chats and those investigations and get people around whilst you're working towards exchange. Alternatively, you could look at a subject to exchange. So you would actually exchange on the purchase of that property, but it would be conditional on certain factors. So here is a price that I am paying you. However, it's conditional on me getting planning for X, Y, and Z. By doing that, you're protecting yourself. You're offering the money that is clearly accepted at the time, but then the person who is selling the property is also accepting that they've got that this might result, but there is a risk associated with that condition. So I think that hopefully picks up a bit of that. I'm not sure it's quite picking up. In terms of your first question, Chris, if we can just go back to that again, if you don't mind repeating that one again.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of providing an empty homes proposal pack to the empty homes officer, which will look like photos, scope, budget, social value, timelines. Is there any templates that can get rapid sign off? Does this look appealing to a potential empty homes officer?
Yeah. Empty homes officers are individuals, and they do have different styles of doing different things. The answer is no, there isn't a template. I'm always just, what the best thing to do is actually have a quick call and just to see if it is on their register. So by just at that first step is, I've seen something, is it on your register? What are you doing? Now, actually asking the question that you've just asked of them is brilliant. That's a brilliant way of engaging. Rather than sending something in to say, look what I could be doing, look what you're not doing, look at all these problems, look at all these things I could solve, and look at the social benefit that I'm doing. If you want to build that relationship, you do need to go and speak to that person. By speaking to that person, you could do the whole thing. You could do all that template again, but you might just find there's some wins in that conversation which just lead you down where they would like to go. And you're just saying, look, I was going to send you, a big report, a template of all the social value and things I'm going to do. Would that be helpful? Would it be good? And if that person might say, well, you know what? Yeah, you could feel something, but actually, I've got loads of other things going on. You're like, what are those other things going on? And actually, is it simpler that, have you had any complaints about this property? And then if they say, well, actually, we have some complaints. All the complaints have been about fly tipping. And you go, well, actually, you know what? I can write something about that. And that's the first step. So solving the first complaint, the first step is the trust. trying to provide the whole solution, it's too much, it's overwhelming because you're not going to do that. But if actually they find out from their complaint, if that property has been identified, that what the first is, actually understanding what the first complaint might be locally, is it just the fact that there's lots of things people might be talking about, but is the first thing, it just looks really untidy. So actually just tidying up the garden and, maybe a lick of paint could be just enough. Maybe the fact that it's got these big boards on the outside, you can mural them as windows. You actually just give it a little bit of life, just in a very temporary. They're only small things, but it's actually making sure that when you speak to the housing officer, you've kind of identified already the feedback, and it doesn't come as an overwhelming wave for them or another big form they've got to look at and go and take consideration in. And then you start to build up that trust and that ladder. So, and then they will lead you that way. So we've got plenty of examples where we've probably gone in a bit too strong, and it's just overwhelming for that individual, and that person who's probably heard it all before. Whereas actually going in with this very, very simple, we've spoken to one of the neighbours. Maybe the empties doesn't even know the neighbour doesn't even know how to complain or to worry about something specific. And a lot of it's normally about antisocial behaviour. So actually, by just focusing on some of that, starts to move that property into a slightly different space and journey.
Definitely. And I think with these two questions, it all comes down to your market research based on the property itself. So with a HMO, is it an Article 4 area, which would probably insinuate that the council are not that interested in having more HMOs? Is there the vacancy for it on spare rooms? How many people are actually looking for rooms versus the rooms that are available? And have you done the numbers on whether it's cost effective to convert it into a HMO? Because like you said, Ben, it could be a building and fire safety issue. Now, if it's just a case that they've been fined for not having the right fire safety tools within the property, then it might be a quick fix and easy to convert that into a fully licensed HMO. But if it's not, what sort of issues are lying about? And then once you've actually done that market research, it's a case of pushing it all together and actually identifying the key issues. So not giving them a business plan of the property and what you're going to do with it. It's more about identifying what their emotional touch points are with the property. So you've got your business plan, but they want to know how the fly tipping is going to be sorted out, how much it's going to cost to do that. Is there antisocial behaviour that's taking place at the property? How are you going to sort that, and what's the cost going to be involved? That's the touch points that they're looking to see, not necessarily your business plan.
I agree, and that's the trust. We all might know where we're heading at the end, but actually, you've got to start on those. So, it's much like a lot of your networking, Chris, and obviously you talk about it a lot, is if you go and you bowl in and you straight away sell, then all that happens is the other person's going to try and do exactly the same to you. And that isn't really a conversation. So, actually understanding just who a person is on a day-to-day basis or in day-to-day issues or problems is exceptional feedback. And it's understanding that. And then they get to ask you questions and why you're interested and why you're involved. And that starts to build up that interest in each other of how a conversation should naturally go. And then that builds in that sort of trusting. But yeah, I think evidence is, oh my gosh, I mean, it's so important. And, and I didn't know quite capture that in our last chat, but you did. And you can't have enough. You can't understand that the ability of actually just trying to understand what's happening in a market, and either whether it's actual just local feedback, like people would actually, if you had residents who all said, actually, we're all happy with it at HMO. I mean, gosh, what's better than that? That's actually on the ground feedback. But in terms of sort of going a bit more sort of local, and then you sort of start moving up through the scale, is finding out and looking at those housing needs studies, looking at actually what the demand is, looking at, in terms of how much social housing is being delivered or not, or affordable housing has been delivered or not, and or private housing or rental sort of demand is in there. These statistics are out there. I mean, the wonderful thing, although it is a bit dangerous AI, but they will give you bits of information. They might send you nuggets. Just please, it is never the answer. It's just a pathway to it. So it might give you more of the questions. But there are stats out there, and it's just working with those and showing and looking at local authority housing numbers. Local authority hold loads of stats, loads of information, because it's the basis of which they build their local plans off. It's the basis of which they build their policies off. They have to do these studies. So asking, doing the reading yourself clearly, but asking you to look into the housing and needs numbers is a good start, because it will send you across the links of which that information is contained, and then reading those links and understanding it, because it doesn't understand context very well. So it just blurts it all out. Whereas actually when you see those things in the context of a document, you can understand why and how something was written, and why the prequel was for why that study was actually needed. And that's really, really, really important. And then that way, you're going to somebody saying, well, this is actually, it's a good thing. And I've done my research. I've not just said, well, it's not fair. So.
Great. Before we go to our last question, Ben, where can people find you? Is there anything that you want to sort of share with our audience? I know obviously Land Hero is collecting so much data on these empty properties at the moment, but if people want to find those empty properties, Land Attic obviously can help them. Would you mind sharing a few details on that?
Yeah, I'm absolutely. Thanks, Chris. I mean, for us, we're hugely passionate with bringing in communities into the crowdsourced and the boots on the ground of people identifying where things are empty and derelict and redundant. Hugely passionate about that. This ranges from everything from, bits above shops, empty pubs, empty petrol filling stations, all the things that we've sort of seen. Yes, absolutely, including empty homes, empty office blocks, huge amounts of floor space, huge amounts of opportunity for people to live and work in. So both, if we haven't got a job, we're not going to live very well. So we've got to have both, and they've got to combined, and we need our high streets doing better. So the point of the app is to really get that full engagement of people. It's very much driven towards them, and then they make those submissions. Now, those submissions are then turfed over onto our platform, which is Land Attic. And Land Attic is all about making sure it's in a presentable form for people to kind of actually understand and sort of narrow down where they see those opportunities. So, yeah, landattic.com, that's exactly where the information is held. And then very much from Land Hero, well, that is on the App Store. And they both work completely in tandem in terms of how they sort of brought together. But yeah, and you'll see as well quite a lot of some of the things I've even talked about today are on Land Attic in terms of the information and the way that we're sort of trying to help and give more information to the pathways of bringing back property development, opportunities to regenerate some of these properties. And then Land Hero is very much community focused and in terms of driving more and more of these sites so that, more developers, more investors can actually be involved. So.
Awesome. So our last question, we've got an ex-drug den in Kings Lynn. How do you evidence to residents and how do you apologies.
That's a problem. You probably shouldn't have those drinks like this morning, I'll be honest.
I just can't help it.
While you get your question out, I'm going to move because the sun is getting me more and more and more. I feel like a vampire. I'm going further and further back, so I'm going to switch sides.
Right, let me get my words out. So we've got an ex-drug den in Kings Lynn. How do you evidence to local residents and also the local community members that bringing it back won't reignite antisocial behaviour and win them as advocates of your project? Thank you to whoever sent that in. That is some big words in there that I really tripped over.
That's literally been my favourite question because Chris struggled with it. So he doesn't struggle with his questions, that's for sure. Normally puts me on the spot. So, bringing back property into use on occupation is by far the clearest and easiest and proven way of improving an area and very much this butterfly positive effect. Because what's happened is the butterfly negative effect has happened. People's perception of an empty building, but actually having proven or thinking that it's actually some sort of drug den is a horrible place to be if you're those neighbouring properties. And also, any sort of perception, sort of someone looking to come and invest in that area is thinking exactly the same. Adam Cliff very well describes it as the broken window syndrome, which is if you see one broken window, there's probably likely to be others. Because if people don't care and they don't board them up quickly, they don't look after them, then the next person comes along and another window gets broken and that side of thing. So it should feel fairly simple to get community on board for bringing that property back into use. Typically, people will worry what it is going to be used for, but actually, when you're driving through the problems that the exact property has itself and the negative impact and value it has on your property. So it's not only reducing your capital value, it's reducing your social value. Some of these things, you don't want to drive through someone's fear straight away, but clearly they must be feeling those things. But if you give it a tangible sort of a thought process going, well, actually, if this property and when this property is reoccupied, your value of your property immediately goes up. That is something that was automatically bleeding into. Yes, what you've got is you also get rid of some of the negative antisocial effects of what's happening and the fear of that. But actually, there's some huge flip side positive elements to happening. If you're the neighbour, if you're right next to it, then actually, you've got things like heating issues and things because you're having to heat a cold wall. You've got no wall next to you if you're an attached property. And also, everything from all those sort of anxiety and fears and mental health that kind of go with those things as well. So by doing that, you're lifting the property values of other people. So it should feel that the right thing, and people should feel that they want to be on board with it. But getting their feedback first is really, really key. Is asking what they would like to see it come forward for, what they would anticipate, rather than saying what yourself think it should be for. I'd like to think they all don't want to keep it as a drug den. So you say, what would you like to see it for? What would you like to see it for? We'd love to see a family in there, or we like to that. Now, it might not be that that's exactly what you end up doing, but the good thing is you're engaging with them, and on the basis of, well, why do you want to see a family in there? And they might just say, well, actually, what, we're not sure really care as a family. It'd be a lovely family, but we just want to see it occupied. And then you can kind of get a common theme which you can then hold on to. Now, you might not always have sort of time for that, but if you've got an opportunity in terms of how you're doing, got a passerby, of what you're trying to drive forward in terms of the public perception and bringing people into what you need them to, their thought process, it's just their mindset, the community, then I think just speaking to people is just by far the key. So.
Great stuff. Well, that was brilliant, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I really do appreciate it. And I know a lot of people will have got value from some of the stuff you shared this afternoon. And hopefully we'll get you back very, very soon to do another one of these clinics, because it's certainly an issue that's not going away anytime soon. But I think developers are looking more at the route of properties that they can find in Land Attic, and obviously local communities are now leaning heavily into Land Hero to try and bring some of these streets and houses back into use. Don has even said, love this session. So there you go. So Ben, we'll get you back very, very soon, but thank you so much for this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. I mean, that was almost newsreader-esque, wasn't it, then, which I liked, as I just then actually, I don't think anyone's done that before, is they raise themselves up to try and block.
That's what got me laughing.
I think that's good. And then it looked like I was really puffing out my chest for some sort of huge opinionated answer. But sorry to everyone there, but at least that's the little nugget that maybe you wouldn't necessarily see on all calls. The problem, but it's a new way. You just literally just come close to the screen, just block them out. It's a new doing. But Chris, it's been absolutely brilliant today, and I think that for us and your passion in terms of driving and bringing people in the community of networking, you've kind of got into just more chance, more opportunities of ways and thinking of unlocking, whether it be property of any sort, whether it's empty or whether it's actually part empty, or where there's opportunity that you can turn something more into a property, whether it's additional planning, extensions, all the rest of it. It's really key that the more it demystifies, SMEs at their core are key. And one thing I've been learning recently is it doesn't feel like it's getting particularly easier, but with tech, it is getting a bit easier. Some of this legislation, red tape, and everything else that's going with it all gives us the ability to embrace the tech so that we can get through and help SMEs at that basic level of just trying to get on board in the property ladder and then make a real difference. So no, really appreciate today's session. It's been brilliant. So thank you.
Thank you, Ben. All right, great stuff, guys. Please do share your posts in the UK Homes Network. We will be back with a new session very, very soon. And we've also got Matt Burrows joining us on Monday night to discuss auctions. David will be hosting that session. It's his first session in about 12 months that he's hosted. So we're really looking forward to that. And I hope you can join us next week. Take care, everyone.
Sure.